Hey everyone, and welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to try something a little different. Tuning out that day-to-day news cycle and tuning into, well, we're calling it the long news. So instead of getting bogged down in the latest drama, we're going to be looking at the, slow and steady trends quietly shaping the future. And often in ways that are, well, surprisingly positive.
Yeah, it's about shifting our perspective from that immediacy of current events to the bigger picture. And that often reveals a much more hopeful outlook.
Exactly. And we're diving into like a treasure trove of articles and blog posts that explore these kind of subtle but powerful forces. So get ready, because the future just might be brighter than the headlines would have you believe. We got some pretty fascinating insights to share with you.
Indeed. Often when we step back and look at the data, we find that progress is actually being made on a lot of different fronts.
Let's start with a big one. Global wealth. It might sound counterintuitive, in a world that's like buzzing about income inequality, but global wealth is actually increasing.
Right.
In fact, 1 billion people have risen out of extreme poverty in just the last 15 years.
It's a testament to the impact of economic development and globalization. Imagine this. In 1820, a staggering 94% of the world lived in poverty. Today, that number has plummeted, and it's projected to fall below 5% in the next 15 years.
Wow. That really puts things in perspective. And while we're talking about, long-term trends, how about this one? Human lifespans. We're living longer than ever before.
Absolutely. Advancements in medicine, nutrition, and sanitation have all played crucial roles. Researchers discovered bacteria that survived for 120,000 years under a glacier in Greenland.
What?
Yeah.
No way.
It really makes you wonder about the potential of human lifespan when even microbes can survive for that long.
It's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah.
It makes those sci-fi movies about extending human life feel a little less far-fetched.
It certainly challenges our assumptions about the limits of human biology.
Okay, confession time. I'm someone who gets a little anxious about flying. Those news reports about plane crashes, even though they're rare, they tend to stick with you.
I understand that sentiment, but here's a fascinating point from our deep dive. Air travel is statistically much safer today than it was a few decades ago. In fact, it's 50 times safer than it was just 40 years ago.
50 times safer. It makes you wonder why those statistics aren't as widely reported as, like, the rare tragedies.
It speaks to a broader point about how our perceptions of risk can be skewed by what we see in the media.
Yeah. Speaking of progress, let's talk about energy. The future is looking pretty bright, and it's not just because of all those solar panels popping up everywhere.
The BP oil spill, while a tragedy, it really ignited a wave of innovation in renewable energy.
Yeah.
Solar and wind power are becoming major players, but what I find especially exciting are the advancements happening in research labs around the world.
Like what? Do tell.
You remember reading about those MIT researchers who harnessed viruses to split water molecules for hydrogen fuel production?
Wait, making fuel from viruses, that sounds like science fiction.
It's still early stages, of course, but the potential is definitely there. This kind of research could revolutionize the way we think about energy.
That's seriously cool. Okay, shifting gears a bit, let's talk about something else that's changing for the better. Mental health. It seems like we're finally starting to break down those stigmas surrounding mental health challenges.
Absolutely. The conversation is finally shifting with more awareness, open dialogues, and a growing understanding that mental well-being is just as crucial as physical health.
We came across a study that really highlighted the progress that's still needed. It found that people massively underreport their history of mental illness, especially when asked to, recall their experiences years later.
Yeah, it underscores that normalizing mental health is an ongoing journey.
Yeah.
The stigma might be fading, but it's far from gone, unfortunately.
Now let's talk about the future of food. Get ready for this. Vertical farms.
It sounds incredibly futuristic, but it's a real and promising solution to feeding a growing global population. Vertical farming, which involves growing crops in vertically stacked layers, could really revolutionize agriculture, especially in urban environments.
It's like those images of, like, skyscrapers transformed into fertile farmlands.
Precisely. And it's not just about aesthetics. Vertical farming addresses challenges of land use, resource efficiency, and environmental impact.
So we've talked about wealth, lifespan, energy, mental health, and even the way we'll grow our food in the future. What other long-term trends did our deep dive uncover?
Well, one fascinating discovery is that despite all of our advancements, human evolution is still very much in progress.
Wait, we're not done evolving. I mean, we've got smartphones and, like, self-driving cars and the internet. What more could natural selection possibly want from us?
It's not about reaching a final destination in evolution. It's a continuous process driven by this interplay between our genes and our environment.
Well,
As our environment changes, and it's changing rapidly these days, so do the selective pressures that shape us.
that makes sense. So what kind of evolutionary changes are we talking about here?
Well, for instance, some scientists believe that the AIDS epidemic is driving the evolution of genetic resistance to HIV in some populations.
Wow, that's both fascinating and terrifying.
Right.
It's like our bodies are fighting back against this devastating disease on a genetic level.
Exactly. It's a powerful reminder that evolution is not just something that happened in the distant past. It's happening right now in response to the challenges we face as a species.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even with all of our technological advancements, we're still subject to the forces of natural selection.
Precisely. And it underscores the importance of understanding these long-term trends.
Right.
They're not just interesting facts. They offer clues about the future of our species.
Hmm.
For example, let's revisit this idea of a declining global population.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around the idea of fewer people on the planet. We're so used to hearing about overpopulation.
It's a profound shift with the potential to reshape everything from our economies to our social structures. Imagine a world with fewer workers, fewer consumers, fewer people contributing to society.
It sounds like both a challenge and an opportunity at the same time.
Exactly. It's a new chapter in human history that we need to start thinking about now.
Right.
We can't wait for the population decline to be upon us to start planning for its impact.
That's a really good point. It's better to be prepared.
Absolutely. Foresight is key.
Speaking of which, let's not forget about the incredible advancements in technology happening all around us.
Right. It's easy to get swept up in the newest gadget.
Yeah.
But the long-term implications of these technologies, artificial intelligence, robotics, genetic engineering, are really profound. They have the potential to fundamentally change what it means to be human.
Yeah. I was reading about scientists developing tiny nanobots that can travel through our bloodstream and deliver drugs directly to disease cells.
Mm-hmm.
It's like,
Nanotechnology has the potential to revolutionize medicine.
oh, wow.
But it also raises ethical questions about, safety, responsibility, and equitable access to these advancements.
It's a lot to consider, and that's just one example. We've also got artificial intelligence becoming more sophisticated every day. I recently saw a documentary about AI that can compose music, write poetry, and even create art that's indistinguishable from, human-made art.
It's mind-blowing, isn't it? It begs the question, what happens when machines become more creative than humans? What will our role be in a world where machines can potentially outperform us in so many areas?
It's like we're entering a new era of evolution, not just biological, but technological as well.
Right.
And the two are becoming increasingly intertwined.
It's a fascinating and somewhat daunting prospect. We're essentially creating our own potential successors' machines that might be smarter, faster, and more adaptable than we are.
It reminds me of that quote from Stephen Hawking. If we're very lucky, they'll treat us as pets. If not, they'll treat us as food.
A provocative statement, but it highlights the importance of careful consideration as we develop these powerful technologies.
Mm-hmm.
We need to stay in control of our creations rather than the other way around, right?
It's like walking a tightrope between progress and caution.
Precisely. And it's a tightrope we're all walking together.
Well said. Earlier I mentioned my slight fear of flying, even though statistically it's very safe.
Right.
It's hard to shake that fear when you hear about those rare but tragic plane crashes.
I understand. We're naturally wired to pay attention to threats, even if they're statistically unlikely. It's a survival mechanism that served us well for a long time. However, in today's world, our perceptions of risk are often out of sync with reality.
Like how we're more afraid of flying than driving, even though driving is statistically far more dangerous.
Exactly. We tend to overestimate the likelihood of rare events, especially if they're emotionally charged or, widely reported by the media.
It's that old saying, if it bleeds, it leads. Bad news sells.
Unfortunately, yes. But it's important to be aware of this bias so we can make informed decisions based on facts, not fear.
So how do we do that? How do we tune out the noise and focus on the long-term trends that truly matter?
It takes conscious effort, but it's worth it. Cultivating a healthy skepticism towards the news is a good start. Don't just accept everything at face value. Ask questions, dig deeper, look for evidence, and consider the source.
I also like the idea of following the trend lines, not the headlines. If you know that air travel is statistically getting safer over time, You're less likely to be swayed by a single tragic event.
Exactly. Trends provide a broader perspective. They help us see the forest for the trees.
It's like that famous quote from Hans Rosling, things are bad, but they're getting better.
A perfect example. The world is complex and rarely black and white.
Right.
There are always challenges, but progress happens too. It's important to acknowledge both.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of heavy stuff. Evolution, technology, population decline. Let's end this part of our deep dive on a more positive note. What's one of the most surprising and hopeful trends you came across in your research?
Well, you might be surprised to learn that despite all the conflict we see in the news, the world is actually becoming a more peaceful place.
Wait, really?
Oh.
But we constantly hear about wars and like terrorism and political instability. How can that be true?
It's another one of those counterintuitive trends that only becomes apparent when you look at the data over time.
Okay.
Since the end of the Cold War, the number of armed conflicts has been steadily declining. In fact, more wars have ended than have started in the past few decades.
That is surprising. What's driving this positive trend?
There are several factors at play, including the rise of democracy, the spread of education, and the increasing interconnectedness of the global economy.
Right.
As countries become more integrated and interdependent, they have less incentive to engage in conflict.
It's a reminder that progress is possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges.
Indeed, it speaks to human ingenuity, cooperation, and empathy.
Well said.
Yeah.
And on that note, we'll wrap up part one of our deep dive into the long news. We've covered a lot of ground today, from the surprising trends shaping our future to the importance of focusing on the big picture rather than getting caught up in the daily headlines.
We've only just scratched the surface. There's a whole world of long-term trends out there waiting to be explored.
You know, we were talking about focusing on the bigger picture instead of getting caught up in, like, daily headlines. It makes you wonder, what are those, like, really big, slow-moving trends that, most people haven't even noticed yet?
That's a question worth pondering. One such trend gaining traction is this rise of the superorganism.
Superorganism. Okay, now you're just using fancy words to sound smart. What is that, like some kind of sci-fi creature?
It does sound like something out of a comic book, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But it's a real phenomenon, and you're more familiar with it than you realize.
Okay.
A superorganism is essentially a colony of individuals that operate as a single unified entity.
Okay, so like an ant colony.
Exactly. Each ant has a specific role, but they work together in this highly coordinated way to achieve a common goal. Think of that incredible teamwork, that unity of purpose.
Okay, I get the ant thing, but where do, humans fit into this whole superorganism idea? We're not exactly known for our, hive mind.
True, but we are seeing aspects of superorganism-like behavior emerge in human societies, particularly online.
Go on.
Consider social media. Millions of people connecting and interacting, sharing information, ideas, and emotions in this vast interconnected network.
Right.
It's almost like a new kind of global brain is forming right before our eyes.
Oh, a global brain. That's a pretty intense thought.
And it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
This interconnected global brain has incredible potential, like solving complex problems, generating innovative ideas, and even like fostering a sense of connection across cultures. It's quite remarkable when you think about it.
But like you said earlier, it's not all, sunshine and roses, right?
Yeah. Right. Social media has its downsides. We've seen how it can be used to spread like misinformation and even incite violence.
You're absolutely right. It's a double-edged sword. Like any powerful tool, it can be used for good or ill.
Yeah.
Cultivating critical thinking, promoting media literacy, and fostering a culture of empathy and understanding. These are all crucial to harnessing the positive potential of this emerging global brain.
It's a lot to think about. Okay, let's come back down to earth for a bit.
Okay.
We've covered a lot of ground today. Global wealth, lifespans, the future of energy and food. Is there anything else from our long news deep dive that you think is particularly important for people to understand?
One trend we haven't really touched on yet is this intriguing possibility that as a society, we're becoming more risk-averse. But we're living in an age of incredible innovation and technological advancement.
Right.
Doesn't that require taking risks?
It does.
Yeah.
But paradoxically, as our world becomes safer and more comfortable, thanks in part to some of the positive trends we discussed earlier, we tend to become less tolerant of risk.
Huh. That's fascinating. Can you give an example of what you mean?
Sure. Think about parenting styles.
Okay.
There's been a noticeable shift towards what some call helicopter parenting,
Right.
where parents are, hyper involved in their children's lives, constantly shielding them from any potential harm or failure.
Okay, yeah, I see what you mean. We're so focused on like safety and security that we might be inadvertently stifling the kind of, risk-taking and exploration that drives progress.
Exactly. And it's not just limited to parenting. We see this trend in the workplace, in entrepreneurship, even in our, personal lives.
So what's the solution? Should we all just throw caution to the wind and embrace like reckless abandon?
Not at all.
Okay.
It's about finding a healthy balance.
Yeah, okay.
We need to encourage a culture that celebrates, calculated risk-taking,
Yeah.
where failure is seen not as an end, but as a stepping stone to learning and growth.
That's a great message. So often we're taught to like fear failure, but embracing it as part of the process can be, incredibly liberating.
Precisely. Without risk, there can be no reward, no innovation, no progress.
Okay. One last trend that really caught my eye. It seems like amidst all this talk of like technological advancements and globalization, there's a growing movement towards like rediscovering and preserving traditional knowledge and practices.
Yes. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is.
There's this growing awareness that traditional knowledge, often passed down through, generations, it holds valuable insights into sustainable living, ecological balance, and even like human well-being.
It's like we're starting to realize that the future might be found in the wisdom of the past.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
We're seeing this resurgence of interest in traditional medicine, ecological practices, and indigenous knowledge systems.
Like that community in the Amazon rainforest that's using their ancestral knowledge to develop, new medicines from plants.
Yeah, precisely.
Yeah.
And it's not just about preserving the past.
No.
It's about integrating that traditional wisdom into our modern lives, creating a more holistic and sustainable future.
Yeah. It's a beautiful example of how progress isn't always linear. Sometimes moving forward means looking back and reconnecting with what we've lost along the way.
Well said.
Before we move on, I wanted to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, this idea of a declining global population.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a significant trend with far-reaching implications. What are some of the potential challenges and opportunities that come with a shrinking population?
It's a question with no easy answers, but it's one we need to grapple with. On the one hand, a declining population could lead to, economic challenges, labor shortages, and a strain on social welfare systems, particularly in developed countries.
That makes sense. Fewer working age people to support a growing elderly population.
Exactly. But on the other hand, a smaller population could also mean less pressure on resources, reduced environmental impact, and a greater focus on quality of life over, endless economic growth.
So it's not necessarily a good or bad thing in itself. It's how we adapt and respond to this demographic shift that will determine the outcome.
Precisely. It calls for a fundamental rethink of our societal priorities and economic models.
Which is never easy. Okay, last but not least, we have to talk about the elephant, or should I say the artificial intelligence in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Technology is evolving at a dizzying pace. What are your thoughts on the long-term implications of this technological revolution?
It's a question that sparks both excitement and apprehension.
Yeah.
We're on the cusp of, incredible breakthroughs in fields like artificial intelligence, biotechnology, and nanotechnology.
Yeah. You mentioned nanobots earlier, microscopic robots traveling through our body.
Imagine the possibilities.
Yeah.
They could target cancerous cells with pinpoint accuracy, repair damaged tissues at the molecular level, even enhance our cognitive abilities.
It sounds both exhilarating and a little unnerving. It begs the question, what does it mean to be human in a world where technology is increasingly blurring the lines between, man and machine?
That's the million-dollar question. As we develop, ever more sophisticated machines, we're forced to confront these really fundamental questions about consciousness, identity, and even the nature of existence.
Yeah.
It's a philosophical tightrope walk, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It's like we're writing a new chapter in the human story chapter, where technology is no longer just a tool, but a force shaping the very essence of who we are.
Precisely. And like any good story, it's filled with both, promise and peril.
Which is a great place to pause for a moment and collect our thoughts.
Yeah.
We've explored a lot of fascinating and sometimes overwhelming trends today.
We have, haven't we? But I think it's important to remember that the future is not predetermined.
Right.
We have the power to shape it with our choices and actions.
It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day hustle and the constant barrage of news. But taking this deep dive into, the long news it's been kind of eye-opening.
It certainly shifts your perspective, doesn't it? When you step back and look at these long-term trends, you start to see patterns and possibilities that you might otherwise miss.
Absolutely. We've talked about some pretty heavy stuff today. Global shifts, technological advancements, even the future of humanity itself.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process.
It is, but I think it's important to remember that knowledge is empowering. The more we understand about these long-term forces, the better equipped we are to navigate the challenges and opportunities that they present.
So true. And, as we've been discussing these trends, it struck me that a lot of them seem to be pushing us towards a more, interconnected and interdependent world.
That's a keen observation.
Yeah.
We see it in the rise of globalization, the interconnectedness of the digital realm, even the way we're starting to address global challenges like climate change and pandemics.
Right.
It seems that our collective future really does depend on our ability to cooperate and collaborate on a global scale.
It's like that old saying, we're all in this together,
Mm-hmm.
except now it's more than just a feel-good sentiment.
Right.
It's becoming an inescapable reality.
Exactly. And it requires a real shift in mindset. We need to start thinking, beyond national borders and embrace a more global perspective.
It's a tall order, for sure. But the good news is humans are incredibly adaptable. We've overcome countless challenges throughout history, and I'm optimistic that we can navigate this transition to a more interconnected world as well.
I share your optimism, and I think it's important to remember that amidst all the uncertainty and complexity,
Yeah.
there is also immense beauty and wonder in the world.
So well said. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on a message of hope and possibility.
Mm-hmm.
We've explored a lot of fascinating and thought-provoking ideas today, and I hope this deep dive into, the long news has inspired you to kind of look beyond the headlines and consider the bigger picture.
It's been a pleasure joining you on this journey of discovery.
And to our listeners, thank you for diving in with us. Remember, the future is not something that just happens to us. It's something we create together, one day at a time. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep looking ahead to the long